What is happening, art family? Taylor with thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com here, and today we are going to be talking about drawing the figure from imagination. Another way of saying that is we're going to be talking about drawing people from your head. So in this particular tutorial, what I'm going to be doing is just kind of demonstrating how I like to construct figures using a lot of the basics I've laid out in my beginner drawing course and in my beginner drawing course videos, as well as in the character drawing course and the simple anatomy course. All this stuff I've covered so many different ways and so many different times that I'm just really comfortable teaching it, and I want you to have a solid understanding when you walk away from this video. So essentially what I'll do is usually I will start my day with some studies. I'll study stuff on Pinterest, I will study other artists on Twitter. I will not outright copy these things typically unless they're photos, but if they're artists, I usually just draw a variation of the pose. Or a variation on their character, and just like a quick sketch to understand some of the stuff they're doing and why I like it. And then I will start to translate that into my own drawing from imagination. So basically what I'm doing is I'm making marks, and those marks are usually in the form of lines to create the flow of the body, to create the flow of the parts. And a lot of those parts are always going to be interrelated in terms of proportion, in terms of how they connect. And once you understand those relationships, you can begin to build things that you actually really feel a sense of dimensionality about, a sense of volume. You see, I'm drawing on all of the forms very, very assiduously. I'm really trying to make sure I understand the three-dimensionality of what I'm creating. All of this stuff is subdivided based on cylinders and based on rectangular prisms or cubes, and based on spheres. Those are the three big shapes that you should know how to draw if you're going to be drawing figures from imagination or figures in general. The limbs are really easy to kind of convert into more detailed shapes from cylinders. Same with the torso and sort of a modified cube, and the head and the sphere. So all those basic shapes end up becoming very useful as we're trying to draw figures from our imagination. But one thing I really want you to notice is I'm also keeping it very loose, and I'm not afraid to erase. I'm not afraid to let go of stuff that's not working. I'm flipping the canvas a ton because it's a digital thing that I really got into. It's probably almost as bad as Control-Zing a whole bunch, but not quite. When you flip the canvas, you get a new view on what it is you're drawing. If you've ever drawn something traditionally and then taken a picture of it and flipped it, you're always kind of really shocked because it hurts a lot to look at all the mistakes that you missed. But when you're working digital, you can flip all the time to make sure you're not missing those same mistakes. One thing that I'll do when I'm drawing figures from imagination as well is not only draw on the forms a ton to make sure that they're dimensional, but I will also be creating a lot of different iterations on the limbs. I want to make sure that the pose is right, or more correct rather, or more appealing. So in this case, it's kind of like a pin-up of a mechanic girl. She's just looking a little sultry. She's got her tool, she's got her pose, she's got sort of a form-fitting outfit, and it's just a little bit spicy, you know what I mean? It's a fun thing to draw from imagination. And I know a lot of people out there want to draw girls, so I figure I'd throw one in. This one's a little bit more edgy, a little bit more robotic, and to be honest, I goofed with the head on this one way too much. The design of the head, I should have just left it alone. But you see, I drew those three diagonal lines that are all parallel to one another roughly. Those parallel lines are where I'm going to be placing the figure in perspective. So when I'm drawing figures, and you see I'm constructing the figure again from just a bunch of subdivided basic shapes, I'm using those parallel lines as a guide. So I'll draw them diagonally because that's the angle I want the figure to be facing. You can imagine a surface plane, just a regular old piece of paper turned at that angle with lines drawn on it, or if you held up a ruler and all of the lines were facing that direction, it's kind of like that. So you're just utilizing those guidelines to start drawing figures from your imagination, because you know that a certain part will line up here, another part will line up there. And it's really, really helpful for getting a rough idea of the perspective and the way that things are going to be moving about in space, and creating a whole lot more believability when it comes to stuff like that. So I wish I would have just left this helmet alone. It was kind of fun and a little more interesting. I end up goofing with it way too much though, which is kind of the problem when you're sketching. If you're not trying a bunch of different versions like in concept art, you might get rid of one of the good ones, and that's difficult as an artist to kind of overwork your stuff. But it happens, these are sketches, these are just for fun. This is just Clip Studio Paint practice time. So I do a lot of this, honestly, and it's why I'm able to draw figures from imagination relatively easily, because this is the bulk of the drawing I've done throughout the whole time I've been drawing. It's always been people or some variation on sort of mechanical parts with people or armor with people. So I'm steeped in my comfort zone when I'm doing stuff like this, which is why you see a fair degree of what seems like ease. It takes a little while to get here if you're consistent, and if you practice a lot of the lessons that I've given you in the beginner drawing course or the anatomy course or the character course, you'll be able to get there quicker because you won't have to make as many mistakes as I did, and you can focus on the fundamentals that actually matter when it comes to drawing the figure from imagination. So, as you can see, just getting rid of the head a ton. I wasn't ever feeling the subdivisions or the designs I was doing, so just letting it go, trying again, starting more basic, and messing around with stuff like that. I'm not sure if I work my way down to the feet on this one, but it's just a really good demonstration of practice and testing and guessing when it comes to working from imagination with the figure, because oftentimes you're not going to be happy with the first iteration of the parts and pieces you're laying in when you're drawing the figure from imagination. It's just kind of part of the game. So you keep stacking those shapes and those geometric aspects together until something really feels like you enjoy the shape design. And sometimes it has to be more bulbous, or it should be a little more sharp and sleek. You start thinking of adjectives and try to describe those shapes with adjectives. It's a good way to work. It's a little more design than imagining the figure, but it all fits on the body anyway, so we're still sort of on track here. At any rate, this one is going to be very similar in that I just drew 3 different lines that are not parallel, and the littlest one, the furthest one away, is rather hard to see, but what I'm doing is I'm switching the angle now. I drew a lying down sort of pin-up female character. I drew a sort of soldier character with a pistol, arms outstretched, but I'm using these lines to guide the process. Those blue lines, in contrast with the more red-orange lines, are just nice to be able to visually separate stuff so that I can see how I'm going to how I'm going to stack these shapes in perspective. So it's really, again, a very loose perspective. It's not rigorous or academic at all. I'm really just trying to force myself to see things in the picture plane in regards to the figures and in regards to their overlapping shapes in a way that makes sense dimensionally and proportionally. There's a lot of things to consider when you're drawing figures or anything from imagination. One of the things I teach in the beginner drawing course is Andrew Loomis's 5 C's and 5 P's. That's in the 12-week edition, I believe, because you have to understand that things like contour and construction and placement and proportion are all very important when it comes to having an idea of how to do this sort of thing, how to master this skill. There's a lot of different terms and ideas that once you cement them in your mind or study them a little bit or have a conscientious approach to them, you'll be able to create at levels that feel much more free and much more like you can, make the comic you want to make or tell the story you want to tell because your technique isn't getting in the way anymore. You have the terminology to sort of help. So I'm really just, again, taking those basic cylindrical forms and subdividing them and imagining things getting smaller or bigger based on their relationship to those lines I placed initially. And so then I end up with a figure that is from closer to a bird's eye perspective, where we're looking down on her as though we are standing on a higher plateau and maybe she's challenging us to a duel or something. Whatever the narrative you want to spin on it is, we're just trying to draw some figures here. And I also wanted to include this last one. I think this is the last or second to last demonstration for this video, wherein I really goof up a lot and erase a lot. And that's just part of the process of getting outside your comfort zone when you're doing this sort of thing and trying to get something that feels like a reasonably good sketch, and then asking yourself why it worked. A lot of the times, I kind of sketch on autopilot. It'll either be, a male or female, some sort of either robotic or fantasy or something, which is fine because we're not trying to get crazy designs with this figure drawing from imagination exercise. We're trying to get figures in various perspectives and poses that feel pretty accurate, or pretty like you buy it visually. You sell that visual and people can buy it and it gets the point across. Or at the very least, the technique is good enough that it doesn't get in the way of whatever message you'd be trying to convey with any given drawing. You should always ask yourself the question of, what is this drawing about, when you're working not so much on technique, but more so on something that's supposed to say something. But in this case, since we're just rocking technique, I'm just trying to find a way to line up a figure that feels like it's in similar perspective to her. And you see, I'm exploring a lot. I'm making huge sketchy messes, and I just couldn't make that guy come together. So I'm trying a pose that's more based on hers. And there's still going to be a ton of messes at the end. I really think it's important to be transparent with a lot of this, because a lot of it is experimentation, and I'm still stretching the outside of my abilities as well, which is why I'm able to just explore a little further up the mountain and, kind of guide others up in terms of their figure drawing, in terms of their abilities, because I've been doing this for, several years now. Just doing the YouTube channel for 7 years. And prior to that, I went to college for 4 for a more rounded out media arts and animation education. But I've really niched. Yes, I've really niched down into drawing. And it has helped me tremendously to find focus, not do a ton of things, not mess around in 3D, mess around with animation. Drawing is the foundation for everything. And when you find your foundation, it's really, really useful for when you want to go into animation, or when you want to do 3D. You can model based off of really strong drawings, or your drawings will be really strong when you animate them. You won't have to struggle so much. In this case, I am struggling, but it doesn't feel like struggle. I wasn't really emotional over it. I was just getting rid of stuff because it wasn't working. So that said, it's just like, well, let's just keep trying. If you have the energy and you're not getting frustrated with yourself, just keep going. Just keep studying for however long you give yourself. Usually I recommend 40 to 60 minutes and then take a nice 20-minute break. So in this case, I decide on a sort of axe wielding companion for our sword bearing lady here, but we're pretty much getting to the end of the video. I just wanted to show you a really in-depth and intimate look at how I tackle the figure from an imagination, and how sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, based on what you're trying to do or accomplish. And we're just basically stacking these shapes in space to make them make sense, and to give a sense of a person being there and having an interesting pose or what have you. So thanks for watching. You can be sure to check out thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com for more courses and tutorials. Like and subscribe if you want, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care and happy drawing.